Hello everyone and welcome to the patch 7.9 rundown. 7.9 is the mid-season, preseason, whatever you want to call it, patch. It is the first patch of the mid-season changes. To my knowledge, there are going to be no pro leagues that play on this patch. There will be at least one or two that come out before, for example, NALCS starts. The mid-season invitational will remain on 7.8 as well for the esports fans out there. But for all of us who are going to have fun and play this ourselves, there's some cool stuff going on. Now, I do think this is a fairly small mid-season. There's definitely some changes, like your games will be different. But in my mind, it's slightly small for a mid-season patch. That's opinion. You believe what you want to believe. So 7.9 has 3 major tank reworks. It has fairly significant itemization changes. And then it has some smaller systems changes that can be interesting as well. So let's start with the tank updates. Number 1, we have Maokai. Okay, so there's every single thing on his kit got changed. So it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. Okay, so his base stats got changed. His health growth, his health regen, and his armor all got changed, and here's the table of that. So 7.8 versus 7.9, he has more health once you get into late game. His health regen is always lower. His armor is always higher, and so if you look at the fact that his health changed and his armor changed, this just said P durability, by the way. Don't forget the fact that there's an M right here. You can see that... oh, no, I take it back. Sorry. These are correctly labeled. So his health rate gets better after level 8. Unsurprisingly, his magic damage reduction and durability is exactly the same because the MR didn't change. And then his armor, because it's higher base, he's slightly more durable early on. The fact that he lost a fair amount of health early game from right here means he is still 4% weaker, even against physical damage dealers, despite his flat armor buff. So technically you can lane bully Maokai a little bit easier. Also, his HP 5 going down does that as well. But his late game team fights, he's 3 to 2% more durable. And honestly, this doesn't mean very much because durability is not that big of a deal when you have items that are, your base stats don't mean that much when you're going to buy items. So it's minor, but whatever. Okay, his passive is getting updated. Sap Magic. Now, instead of basically every time someone casts a spell around him, there's now a cooldown whose cooldown goes down each time Maokai casts a spell, which is unchanged, or he gets hit by a spell, as opposed to simply someone cast a spell around him. So like the Lee Sin or the Evelyn that's wave clearing doesn't just give him his passive, they've got to hit him with stuff. So basically, in lane, this is available more often, right? Because how often are you going to cast, 7 spells or whatever it was before? And if you cast 7 spells and they hit him, and they didn't have to, of course, in the old version, I mean, it's instantly refreshing, right? I mean, 5 spells instantly refreshes the passive once you're level 17 or higher, which is very late game, but, we look at some random numbers, right? Basically, this is up way more often in the early game, and it's going to be up less often in team fights, essentially. So you can call it a buff, you can call it a nerf, do whatever you want. The actual values are changing as well. Instead of being some percent flat HP at these levels, it's some flat amount plus some other percent of his max HP. As you can see, these numbers seem to be quite higher, and in fact they are. So we're going to show you the difference in his passive numbers. At 7.8, based on his base stats, this is what the numbers were. And at 7.9, this is what the new numbers are. And you can see that at level 1, it's 20% stronger. And by the end of the game, it's 2.5x as strong. So Sap Magic is way more health now. It is so much more HP. It is so much more impactful. It is up more often in the early game. I think that's just factually accurate. And it is up a little bit less often in team fights. If you're getting routinely assaulted by Cassiopeia and Ryze and things like that, okay, it's up as often. But generally speaking, that's the difference. Okay? Way more health per hit, up more often early, which means way more sustain early game. Considering that his health regen's going down, that's probably fine. And then in team fights, it's way higher. Like, the overall health gain is almost definitely higher. Okay, there's changes to his Q. It's getting a new name. Fine, whatever. Cost unchanged, cooldown unchanged, cast time about 12% faster, which is nice. Basically, it's interesting because this actually nerfs bad players. If so, a very common thing for Maokai to do is to W somebody, root them in place, and then Q smash them so they get knocked into the air. Now, a good player will wait the right amount of time for the root to be roughly done, then get the knockup, because if they're already rooted, why bother knocking them up, right? Makes sense. Bad players would just W into instant Q and be like, all right, I hit my spells. And the funny thing is, the shorter this cast time, the more likely you are to overlap your knockup with the root duration. Very, very minor, but technically exists. Either way, I mean, it's just a better spell, right? Better cast times are basically just always better for a player. Damage unchanged, cooldown unchanged, mana cost unchanged, we talked about. So the knockback is increased if you're on top of him. Okay, minor CC gains. And then the slow is changed from a longer duration moderate slow to a very short duration high slow. And so I quickly did the numbers on that as well. This thing likes to fight me. There we go. And so what I did is I use quotes slow as my mechanic for this. And I said, if it were a 1 second long slow, this is what the percentage slow would be. I basically normalized to a 1 second slow. And you can see that, you know, you would basically take away 30 to 70% of somebody's movement over the course of a second, which is quite a lot. And you can see these numbers feel a lot lower. It's like, wait, why did I go from 30 to 70 to like 25 flat? And it's something you've got to kind of realize when you talk about these slows, though. Okay, when you talk about slows like this, in a world where you're playing 1v1 with no other slows, this is a worse slow, right? Because instead of slowing someone for a second and a half or 40% or something, I'm slowing you for a quarter second for your entire move speed, but like the total movement removed is not very high. And it's like, well, this is a nerf. But we don't live in that world. We live in the real world where you have teammates who have slows as well. You might buy an Iceborne Gauntlet. You might buy a Randuin's Omen. You might have saplings that slow. You might buy a Righteous Glory. You might have a red buff. You might have Ash on your team. You might have Singed on your team. All these things are in the real world that we actually live in. And if you don't know, in League of Legends, slows do not stack, period. If you are slowed by 17 different slows, you are only slowed by the single highest power slow, and the rest are ignored. Which means if we're in a world where Singed has Mega Adhesive down, which is like a 70% slow at one of the ranks, your old Arcane Smash just didn't do anything. There just was no slow. It had no effect at all. In the real world we live in, where Singed does exist, and you might have this high potency, low duration slow, means it always will have an effect. Now, whether it's on net a positive or a negative, that's up to you to figure out in the games that you're in. In the 1v1, it's certainly worse. But in teamfight scenarios where there are other slows, this is actually fairly useful. Okay, that's the kind of situation we're in now. W has some changes. The mana cost goes up with rank. Cooldown unchanged. Damage changed significantly, and the root duration changed significantly. All right, this is... You're probably not going to max W early anymore because you're getting 25 damage per rank up, and you're getting 0.1 seconds root per rank up. That doesn't seem all that high. But let's look at it. So this is his W damage. We used Ashe as the target. Ashe is very, very low HP for an average champion. Generally speaking, if you're landing against a Nautilus or a Zac or a Sejuani or something, I'm just naming the tanks in the tank update, that health is obviously higher, and so the damage is obviously higher because it was percent health damage. But we use Ashe as an easy example, and we said if you were to max W second, which might not be true, but if you did, which is what he does at 7.8, here's the damage differences. Very early game, it's about the same, and it gets worse pretty quickly. And, you know, there's like breakpoints like level 7 where the percent HP is obviously taking over. You can compare the AP ratio, 0.4 versus that 3% max HP damage. And again, the breakpoint is around 1,300 health right here, where the AP ratio is now worse. Now, to be fair, in the early game, people don't have 1,300 health, so, you know, in the laning phase, AP means more for your W, but in the late game teamfights, your damage is lower, the base damage is lower, and in late game teamfights, the AP ratio is lower. And then, of course, with the root duration as well, you can see it's the same for rank 1, which, again, first 7 minutes, or first 7 levels, it's identical. And this is relevant, by the way, the first 7 levels are a lot of the game. So, you know, your gank assist hasn't changed in the laning phase in any way at all. But yeah, as time goes on, you're losing a quarter of a second, half a second or so. Obviously, W is a weaker skill. That's just factually the case. Again, the level incentives have gone down. because the root duration and the mana cost got changed. So W is likely not to be max second. I think that's kind of no surprise to most people with these changes, but it's obviously a weaker ability. Q is a changed ability, could be stronger, could be weaker based on the situation you're in. And now we have large changes to Sapling Toss. Now, Sapling Toss is generally speaking buffed. There are parts where it's weaker, parts where it's better. So let's talk about them. Mana cost goes down. Cooldown goes down. Sapling duration went down as well. That's a little unfortunate. However, we're going to quickly cut to this, which is if you toss it in a brush, the sapling duration is back to where it used to be, essentially. It goes from 40 to 60 to 30 to 70, which means that there's more level incentive on it. The mana cost not going up with rank means that there's more level incentive as well. E is probably your second max. You're probably going to Q max into E max. You might E max first because Q's level up incentive is... I mean, it's still cooldown, but the slow didn't get any better. That's debatable. You probably still Q max first, but I think you definitely E max at least second. Probably exactly second. Okay, and then the damage has changed by quite a lot. And we're going to cover that real quick. So the damage went from some flat values with an AP ratio to a flat plus % health damage with a AP ratio on the % health damage. Okay, so let's look at what this means if you're, again, fighting Ash. New saplings, Maokai 7.9 fighting Ash. Here's the old damage, and here's the new damage. Oh, even against a squishy such as Ash, and by the way, I said if you were to max E second, here's what it looks like, because I think you will max E second. So even maxing E second, where the old base damage, got bumped up pretty quickly by level 13, the damage is still higher at all times. Now, the AP ratio is worse. So if you were building AP Maokai and relying on saplings, you're weaker. I mean, the base damages are not that much higher. This is plus 50, and this is half the AP ratio, right? So there's differences here. It takes only a couple hundred AP for the ability to be worse, period. But if you're buying like 3 Doran's Rings, this ability is still stronger. And again, this is against Ash. There are tankier champions in the world. Always, basically. Now, the slow also got changed. We'll go back into everything else we saw in the patch notes. The slow, instead of a 1 second slow, is a 2 second slow. I don't really know why this has to exist. Actually, I do. I take that back. It exists because of this mechanic right here. Okay, so we've talked about the cooldown changes, and the mana cost changes, and the damage changes. The damage is higher. The duration, again, is changing from this to this in brush. But here's the interesting thing as well. Saplings tossed in a brush last longer and have a larger detonation radius. Enemies caught in the explosion take another that damage over 2 seconds. And of course, this damage over time matches the slow duration. Now, the reason it's slow is so you can't sapling bomb, right? Because a sapling explosion right here does the damage all at once. But much like Teemo Shrooms, this is basically how Riot does mines in the game, and I think it's actually good because techies is annoying, is mines that can stack are basically always damage over time. So that mushrooms from Teemo don't stack, Jack-in-the-Boxes actually push themselves apart, and sapling explosions apply a damage over time. So this damage can be doubled, which immediately makes it amazing, because we look at these numbers and you're like, oh, the damage is higher. Also, it could double. A level 18 Maokai with no items against an Ash with no items has 600 damage saplings. That is a basic ability. That's really high, right? The amount of damage you can, and keep in mind, this is no AP against the squishiest champion in the game. There is some real damage here. There is some real damage here, okay? So there's some stuff there that you might want to care about. Sapling definitely becomes a real threatening ability. As far as you using it in the jungle, again, the dot doesn't stack, and the duration is down to 30 seconds at level 1, right? Even if it's in brush, which means if you're giving saplings to a jungler to leash at the very start of the game, like on Raptors or something, the explosion dot won't stack. If you're leashing your own blue buff, there's ways to do it where you kind of sequester them out, because with an 11-second cooldown, you can get 3-ish out and then cast a 4th when you start jungling. And if you kite it properly, you can use another one and use another one and use another one. Proper play, you will use multiple saplings on your first jungle clear. And you'll have to learn that aggro radius, and it will take some time to get right to do it. But that is a skill that Maokai jungles will have to learn, is proper sapling leashing for themselves. Which I think is really compelling and interesting. I like, optimizations like that, and that is a skill that Maokais will need to learn to clear their camps properly. Okay, so E is a better ability, just period, in a lot of ways. Again, the slow, longer duration, but less potent is a buffer on Earth, depending on what you think about it. We talked about potency of slows before. And then his R is getting entirely reworked, entirely new ability. It is no longer AoE damage reduction into explosion of damage. It is now a Nami tidal wave that you can tank that roots people and damages them. The root duration, by the way, goes up to 2.4 seconds. That's really good. Cooldown, pretty reasonable. This is reasonably short for a tank ultimate. This is not too bad. It's better than a Mumu, I'm pretty certain. Damage, not that high, but respectable. I mean, basically, there's not a lot of math to do on the ability. It's pretty good. It's, again, worth pointing out that your teammates or your opponents can tank the wall for each other. It works like Thresh's The Box, where you can tank one section and that section breaks out and then everyone can follow through. It means that Maokai and Nami actually have synergy because you either line up and get hit by Tidal Wave, or you spread out to dodge Tidal Wave and get hit by the Brambles. It's really minor, but, you know, champions like Victor and Rumble can make use of this as well, where Maokai alongside a Victor or Rumble or a Graves ultimate, things like that, can hit everyone in a line. Really, really minor synergies. It's not going to mean a lot, I think, for competitive play in that regard, but hey, root duration scales up. It's a cool ability. If you haven't seen it, there's a mid-season spotlight out on the League of Legends YouTube channel that shows what this ability does. It looks pretty cool. Certainly, I think Maokai is less tanky as a result. We saw his base stat changes were very small. It's, you know, 2 to 5% somewhere. His passive healing is definitely much higher. This ultimate is definitely, I would say, more impactful. You will notice the lack of damage reduction. Maokai's will be dying faster. It will happen. That is a factually accurate statement. But he has more CC, and saplings are way more damage, and it's going to be interesting to play around. Okay, updates to Sejuani. Now, Sejuani is pretty interesting. So she's getting some base stat changes. Okay, so she's getting less base armor, more armor growth, more attack range, less base AD, less AD growth, less base attack speed, more attack speed per level. Okay, so there's some durability changes, and there's some attack damage changes. Oh, and one thing I forgot to point out when we talked about Maokai is we talked about how the W damage went down and the E damage went up. This is his W plus E damage in a mythical world where you somehow max W and E second at the same time, which I realize can't exist, but I didn't have a better way of really showing the damage numbers, and I didn't really want to go do incredible, like, even more math because this was like 2 a.m. when I finished this one. So in a mythical world where you somehow max W and E second at the same time, which again I know is impossible, the damage of your combo is like 95% as effective. So the damage that you lost from W went into E pretty flatly. Just to show you that. Okay, let's talk about Sejuani. Okay, so Sejuani's armor changed. You can see at level 5 it's higher. Now, but keep in mind her base health is the same, so it's just basically at level 5 she has more armor, at level 4 she has less. So again, slightly squishier in the jungle clear. 95 armor at level 18 is a lot though. And then we have her attack damage is different, her attack damage is different, her attacks per second changes, and so her DPS is this. So she actually lost 10% of her auto attack DPS at level 1, and she lost armor early game. These obviously both hurt her jungle clear. She takes more damage as she deals less. Even tank junglers needed auto attacks, so she is worse at clearing the jungle, and then by very late game, I guess she has 6% more DPS because the attack speed scaling takes off. Worth pointing out, she still has gained 25 attack range, which is pretty meaningful. Also, just in pointing out attacks per second, right around here, this level 8 mark, at a level 8, she's now attacking faster than before. And considering that she has a passive-ish that's based around just landing attacks on people, she's essentially a Braum passive, we'll show it later, your actual attacks per second is kind of relevant. So, okay, here's what the base stats mean. Tankier later, higher attack, higher DPS later. Those are really minor because her auto attack DPS doesn't mean much, but those are the base stat changes. Her passive is entirely different. There's 2. Let's start with this one, okay? Basically, she gets kind of a Malphite passive. After not taking damage for a while, Sejuani gains bonus resists and slow immunity. Frost armor lingers after taking damage, which is, I guess, more of a Malzahar passive thing. Now, what's interesting is the resists that are gained, which is doubles the current resist and adds 100. This is functionally identical. It is identical to 50% damage reduction. Double plus 100 is exactly the same as 50% damage reduction. The only difference is if you have like a Last Whisper, it's worse. That's it. So it's 50% damage reduction that respects Last Whisper and Black Cleaver and things like that. That's all it comes down to. This is 50% damage reduction. So for 1 to 3 seconds, when coming into a team fight, She has 50%. She comes to a team fight with an Alistar ultimate, right? And then it wears off after 1 to 3 seconds. And you know, level 7 is, you know, kind of important to get to. It doubles the duration of that, which is a really big deal. So, you know, getting 7 as a jungler is a pretty important power spike. And of course, you're immune to slows. You can run through Singed and things like that. Obviously, people can still Buster Shot you and stun you and whatnot, but immune to slows is still a useful mechanic. 9 seconds of not taking damage, and doesn't get broken from minions and non-smiteable jungle monsters. So if you've killed the big raptor, the small raptors won't get rid of it. Worth pointing out, by the way, that this damage reduction does work against the jungle, right? Why wouldn't it? So, you know, if this 9 seconds comes through and you can kill off the Gromp and then run over to the raptors, you'll have, you know, 1 to 2 seconds of damage reduction while fighting the raptors. Great. Okay, congratulations. And if you find a way of one-shotting the big raptor that never hits you, I guess you keep it on. Okay, whatever. Anyway, she's tankier and immune to slows. This is powerful. This is real good. All right, she also has a second passive, which is if she ever stuns someone, she can auto-attack them while they're stunned to do 10 to 20% of the target's max health at the same break points as her damage reduction. Demonstrated does 400. Oh, baby. Now, keep in mind, you have ways of stunning monsters. You attack them 4 times and hit E on them. But let's show the damage on this. This is, again, against Ashe, and the damage goes up to 375. Against Ashe. Ashe is a squishy champion. So, obviously, you can see the damage scales up really quickly when you start getting more levels. Level 7 is a big spike. So is level 14 for obvious reasons. Anyway, this damage gets really high. This is pretty important. Getting those attacks on frozen enemies is a thing that you care about. Okay, so a buffed passive and a new passive does bonus damage. Sounds good. Where's the catch? Here's the catch. Every other ability got nerfed, basically. Okay, so Q is a lot weaker. So mana cost went down and the cooldown went down, so that's nice. But the damage went down, the knockup duration went down, and the knockup's no longer AoE. Those are all large nerfs. You can see, right, cost got better, cooldown got better unless you max it, but the damage got worse and the CC duration got nerfed. This is a weaker ability, it is. You probably won't max it second anymore. You might, but, I mean, you're not getting any CC duration. Their damage is only going up by 30 per rank, and the cooldown is going down by half a second. I feel like you do not max this till last. This is now a 1-point wonder, at which point, hey, 13-second charge is not too bad. Now, I'm pretty sure it used to be a 1-point wonder already. I believe Sejuani used to max W into E anyway, and that probably won't change. So, you know, really all you care about is this first row, which is the cost is down 10, the cooldown's down 2, the damage is down 20, who cares? Okay, the CC is worse, that's it. It's going to remain a 1-point wonder, and the later scaling numbers don't mean as much to you, because you have to hit level 14 for it even to matter, which most games are decided by the time a jungler's 14, on average. Winter's Wrath, major changes, complete rework of the ability. Instead of being an on-next hit into Sunfire Cape, it's now sort of a 2-hit slam. I'm trying to think of an ability like that, a little bit like Camille W, I guess, where it's kind of this delayed, I can move and I hit people in an area. And so cooldown is basically the same. Cost is higher. This does damage based on Sejuani's max health. The old W had target max health. We'll go into all that stuff later, but basically quarter second slam, quarter seconds, and 3/4 second slam again. But it is a fairly long range sort of cone ability. So this has reach now. Sejuani's no longer entirely melee outside of her ultimate. This can actually hit people like down a lane. You can aggro jungle camps with it. You can harass people with it. This now suddenly has some extra value. You can move while casting it. So suddenly it's not a melee ability, which is a pretty big difference. Also worth pointing out that the hits will apply frost. So if you need ways of stacking your passive, which we'll talk about in a second down there, it works that as well. So even though the damage is down, it is ranged, which is a thing. Okay, so there's a W damage. And this is, again, against Ashe, using her max health as stuff. You see the damage very quickly gets outstripped. And by late game, her W did insane damage. It was actually insane damage. W was maxed first. It probably still will be. That's not a guarantee. E might be maxed first instead, as it's better stunning. Unsure. But because W tends to be stronger early game, if you do leave W to max second, you're still getting a lot of the value out of it, because most of W's damage, if we go back to the site, right, the rank up is 5 damage and 35 damage, but the percent max HP damage is going nowhere. So a lot of the power in this ability is there at rank 1. Yes, the cooldown goes down. That's nice. And yes, the base damage can go up, but you don't have to rush maxing the W because the percent Sejuani max HP ratio, and I'm pretty certain this is Sejuani's max HP, not your target's max HP. I'm pretty certain it's Sejuani's max HP. That you probably leave this to max second, and you instead max Permafrost first. So let's talk about Permafrost. Basically, she gets a Braum passive. What's nice is she doesn't have to hit them first. As long as even her teammates hit them at all, just basically her and melee allies who auto-attack will apply stacks. And at 4 stacks, she can cast the real ability, which has no cooldown and no mana cost. You can't re-hit the same target for a few seconds, but you do some damage and you stun for 1 to 2 seconds. You probably, well, it's interesting because if you max E first, your jungle clear kind of sucks because the damage is horrible. Well, the damage is horrible, but you still get to use this passive on it. But this is unrelated to your E rank, so maxing E doesn't really do anything for you. But you do double the stun duration. So I don't know which one it's going to be. I don't know if you max E first or not. Because the damage is crap, W's damage is definitely higher, but it's way more CC, which is maybe worth it. And I can't tell you. People are going to find out over time if it's better to just be a hard stunning champion or to have a little bit more damage in their jungle clear. My instinct is W. Jungle clear is important, but I don't know for certain. Either way, I did math comparing the E. It's kind of futile because the ability is entirely different, but technically, yep, you see the damage went down a little bit, but the CC is insanely better. Anyway, this is really sweet, and Sejuani is just, she has way better crowd control now, outside of her ultimate. Okay, now finally, Sejuani is getting major changes to the ultimate. Oh baby, cooldown got better. Point blank ultis do almost nothing. If it's a point blank ult, it does 100 to 150 damage and it stuns for 1 second. That's crap. Also, the stun is no longer AoE, which is also crap. So if you do a point blank bola, you do 100 to 150 damage and stun for 1 second. Congratulations, the ability's done. That's all it does. It's over. That's the ultimate. If you point blank ult, it does nothing. It's not even an ultimate. Like, her E is literally better than this. Point blank ultimates are worse than Permafrost. So don't use point blank ultimates. Right? That's just done. However, if it travels at least 400 distance, which is very short, it's, you know, less than a Lucian auto attack, but it is not melee, then instead it does this much damage. It stuns for 2 seconds, and creates an ice storm. So the old bola is gone. That was an AoE stun or an AoE slow if it whiffed. It is now a single target that creates an ice storm. So for 2 seconds, it's a 30% slow. Now that storm is very large. The AoE of the ultimate storm is like, it's larger than her old ultimate AoE, and it's larger than like a max duration Anivia storm. It's pretty big. And if they stay in it for 2 seconds, they take the same damage again. I'm pretty sure this will double hit the main target. I could be wrong. I've heard that it doesn't double hit, but I don't know where I heard that. It doesn't say anything here. It's possible that her ult does double hit for 700 damage, but I'm unsure. And you get a giant slow and a ton of burst at the end. And this is really, really powerful, obviously. Yeah, it's basically a new ultimate, right? If you land this and it's empowered, you get a new ultimate for free. It's pretty strong. She no longer has big AoE crowd control, but she has good single target crowd control. Worth pointing out, if you land your R, by the way, it turns off the permafrost stun. That said, if your teammates land the permafrost and you stun them, you can then follow up with the ultimate really easily, and that's okay. But you can't R into E. It doesn't work that way. All right. Zac gets a upgrade as well. Passive changes, base stats changes, I didn't see the numbers, so it's basically the same, doesn't matter. Passive is unchanged, no big deal. Q is now crap at wave clear. So the cooldown is, I think it's a bit worse. The damage is definitely worse. The slow is arguably worse, but it grabs an enemy champion or an enemy, auto-attack someone else, and you slam them together. And that's hard CC. So he has hard CC outside of his E and his ultimate. which means, yeah, he loses some damage, he loses some wave clear power, but he now has hard CC on the kit on a 12 to 8 second cooldown. So we can look at his numbers. Oh, so here's the R damage, by the way. I forgot to bring up the chart for it. I've been disorganized. I apologize. You can see the cooldown's always better. The damage, if you short it, is crap. If you get everything, it's obviously very, very high. If you can't double hit, then it's just the same damage. And then you can see the stun duration used to be 1 1/4 to 1 3/4. Now it's 1 or 2, which means if you short it versus get it long, it's always worse or always better. And then the old slow value. This is interesting. So the old slow value of the ultimate was this, based on the old durations and the old slow value. And then just the basic ice storm is this. And then the really good ice storm is that, basically. The amount of movement speed you're losing. You're losing 3 seconds of your movement for a big storm. Let's go into Zach. Okay, so his Q damage, you can see, used to do this much. The basic hits are now down here. It's pretty crap, but because you do the damage once on hit and then once on slam, you can double damage a target, which gives you this number, which is pretty good. It's 30 higher than his old Q. So as far as single target damage is concerned, if you can land the ability, it's, I guess, more. And again, you stun them. Cooldown's worse, but not by a ton once you rank it. And you're going to max Q second, probably. And then the slow is obviously worse as well. So again, it's worse for wave clear. It's worse for slowing, but it has a stun component, so it's probably better for overall CC. And the damage you can get onto your target is better, so that's kind of how the ability works now. W is unchanged. E has very, very minor changes. Basically, if you're holding E for a long time, it times out slightly faster. It means almost nothing. I mean, I'm sure there are Zach mains out there who are like, but I wanted it. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Damage slightly down, and the CC duration is also down. These are, again, all nerfs. So the cancel timer goes down 0 to 0.2 seconds. As a jungler, you almost always max E first. The damage going down as well, 0 to 40. And as a jungler, you usually maxed E first. And the stun duration or the knockup duration is half as well. These are all very large nerfs. His E got weaker as an ability, period. It is just a worse ability now. Now, E can hit confirm into Q, right? If you E someone half seconds long enough to land the Q on them, attack something else and go, now kiss. So, you know, as an overall stunning champion, and keep in mind, right, the Q damage went up by 40, or sorry, by 30, and the E damage went down by 40. So if I E into Q you, it's the same. Now I'm still missing like the giant AoE from the old Q, and I'm missing maybe some of the slow here. But as far as like EQing someone and stunning them up, it's you know, it's decent, right? So that kind of comes back in. And, you know, you don't have to hit confirm them, right? You can use Q separately as other CC. I mean, E's cooldown is up to 12 and Q's goes down to 8. So you're going to have that time where you have the Q stun and you don't have the E, and then it's a better ability, right? You have more crowd control. His repeatable crowd control is better as a result. His burstiness is somewhat down. His repeatable crowd control goes up because stuns on low CCs are good. R is a very different ability now. R is kind of now a Lee Sin kick. Let's talk about all the mechanics. Okay, so there's no cost. Who cares? Cooldown is a pretty standard tank ultimate cooldown now. While charging is immune to CC, so theoretically, you can use it to like dodge important abilities, I guess, right? You can use it to get away from stuff. I'm pretty sure actually you can use it as like a Warwick ultimate, where you're like, oh, I'm going to die. Let's just leave. Like you can. It's not pretty, but you can. So it's an escape tool at the very least if you kind of suck at the champion. But hey, it's there. It's power still. So basically, while you charge, you basically hold down R and you charge for 1 to 2.5 seconds. While you're charging, you slow people so they can't get away from you, right? The entire combo is you E onto them and then you hold R. So while you're holding it, they're slowed. And then if you hold for at least a second, you then leap across the map right here. Oh yeah, sorry. So if you don't charge for a second, you just knock them up and leave. Whatever, not a big deal. You knock them up and you go away. So you can like E into Q into like double tap R just for the CC. If you just need like quick lockup for your team, you can do that, and that's fine. You don't do any damage. It's not very special, but you can do it. So that exists. Or you have this if you can charge for more than a second, which is, this is a very long range, by the way. This is more than a Lee Sin kick. So you pull them like, you know, a Caitlyn auto attack range across the map. You do, it's some damage. It's Sejuani ult damage. It's not insane, but it's something. And then you slow them when you land. So this is like, right, I eat in, I give you a half-second knock-up, I charge my ultimate so that the other half-second when you're not knocked up, I'm slowed, and then over we go, I bring you over to my team. Honestly, this is insanely powerful. Like, the old ultimate was a ton of damage, and it really was, and we can show you the damage numbers. His old ult damage was this. Now, you couldn't always get the full 4 bounces on every champion, so this is not exactly fair, but this is like the highest possible damage, and this is the new damage, which obviously, yes, is halved. I mean, the damage is down. Zaka does less damage as a champion. That's just an accurate statement, but you freaking kidnap an entire team comp. Kidnapping a team is really powerful, right? Like, everyone tells you that Lee Sin falls off a cliff by endgame, and yet you still see him do well because he has those kickback potentials. Zaka does that stuff too. It's real good. I think the ultimate is I mean, I don't want to say it's a stronger ability. They do different things. He is a different champion now, to be fair. But it makes him a tank and not a juggernaut, is what it comes down to, right? He's not Hecarim now. He's a tank. He still has the old W damage, right? A lot of the damage came out of that and stuff, but yeah, it's different. So those are the 3 reworks, okay? They became more tanks. The repeatable damage mostly came down. Sejuani got more repeatable CC. Zac got more repeatable CC. Maokai got a big crowd control ultimate, and Maokai got insane saplings. I guess you could also use Zac ultimate as a peel tool. You can just like ult on top of your own Callista and then just send their Renekton away. So you can kind of go both ways. It's also worth keeping in mind, by the way, when you're talking about kidnapping the front line. When you're talking about kidnapping the front line and you deliver it to the back line, keep in mind you are damaging enemies in the landing area and you're slowing enemies in the landing area. So if I'm taking the Malphite and sending him back to his team, I'm damaging and CCing and slowing all of them together, right? There is actually some value in that. Again, if you're going to play disengage the front line, you can use it to damage and slow the back line, which can be very valuable. Can be. I'm not saying it's like optimal gameplay always, but that's a combo you can have, right? It's a nice sort of added touch from the designer that says, hey, if you do it this way, there's extra benefit.